Well, our thanks as always to Home Street Bank for their support of this podcast. If you're looking for a bank that has it all, great people, great service, great rates, this is the place for you. This is my lender of choice. It should be yours as well. Go to homestreetbank.com. It's your one-stop shop for all your banking needs, both business and personal. That's homestreetbank.com. So why do people fear change? Well, we've got an answer to that question coming up next on The Buyer's Mind.
Welcome to The Buyer's Mind, where we take a closer look deep inside your customer's decision-making mechanism to reverse engineer the perfect sales presentation. Now, please welcome your host, Jeff Shore.
Well, welcome everybody to The Buyer's Mind. Jeff Shore here with you, along with our show producer, Mr. Paul Murphy. And Murph, I got a quick question right from the very beginning. Do you like change? Do you not like change? What are you thinking?
I am not a big change guy. I go into In-N-Out and I order the double, and I don't do anything different with it. I'm not going to go for the single, not going to go, even though their menu is simple. I'm even simpler.
Tell me you get it animal style, though.
No. See, I don't. That's just it. It's simple.
When you like things the way you like them over and over again, do you get frustrated by people who, like me, who really love change, who are kind of change freak?
I think people who change a lot ruffle my feathers a little bit. But if things never changed, then life would be really boring. So I enjoy it when you change things.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about this in the context of something that psychologists call the status quo bias. And this is an emotional bias that just about everybody carries. It's only a matter of degree. But the status quo bias indicates a preference for the current state of affairs, right? It's so that the current baseline, the status quo, if you will, is taken as a reference point in my life. And any change from that baseline is perceived as a loss or a potential loss. So basically, I end up fearing change more than I fear staying the same, even if there are deficiencies in that current situation. So just as an example, Murph, if I said, suppose you're thinking about getting a new computer, and you have no doubt that there are improvements to computers over the past few years, you're quite convinced that there's a better computer out there, but you know your computer now. You understand how it works. It might not be perfect, but it's comfortable. Do you sense the tension in that example?
Yeah, there is a tension in that example, just between the desire for maybe a faster computer, but then transferring everything over and trying to get through the bugs on the new system. And you know the system really well. It's a tension.
Sure. And ultimately, we ask ourselves the question, is that worth it? Right? It's that my wife and I have vacation in not only the same place, Maui, but in the same condo. Many, many times, we keep going back over and over. And now, like, deep down, do I want to explore other places? Well, I do, but there's something really comfortable about the familiar. And when I say that there's something comfortable about the familiar, this explains the status quo bias. And we got to get into that today to understand what our customer is going through. Because what's happening here? Well, what it comes down to is the question of how we see things. We're always in this mental battle between our present and our future. Whenever we're thinking about buying something, a pair of shoes, new golf clubs, a car, a watch, a home, whatever it is, we're always in this battle of our present versus our future. Now, the battle that we have to deal with there is that our present is concrete. I know what it is. It's concrete in my mind. But our future is abstract. Some people need to take time not just to consider the future, but to really play with the idea, to turn it over and over in their mind, to mentally live in that future and to determine what that's going to look like. And I remember years ago test driving a car. It was a convertible. And I live in an area where there are a lot of windy roads. And the salesperson said, you can't test this car on a busy street. You got to get out on a windy road. And we got out there on a windy road and we put the top down, and it was just like, I'm smiling, he's smiling. Of course I bought that car. Why? Because I was able to take that out of a concept, an abstract, what would it be like to drive a convertible, and put it into concrete by actually doing that. And I just want to ask yourself the question right now, how much do you think about providing a clear future for your customer, a clear picture of that future? What can you do to help that customer take the abstract and make it concrete? Daniel Kahneman suggests that we think of our future in terms of anticipated memories. Your very job as a salesperson is to bring clarity to anticipated memories. You need to help your customer to paint the picture of their future life. The product that they are buying is not best described by its features. They can read that on your website. The product that they are buying is best described by their future life. The product that they're buying is all about the solution to a better life by the time they are done. So this is what I want you to do. I want you asking yourself the question, how do I bring clarity to the future, to that abstract future? What can I take out of their life right now that's working well and carry it with them into their new future? When you do that, and it might take some persistence, but when you do that, it makes it so much easier for your customer to make a purchase decision. Well, I'm really excited to have Jeff West on the show. Jeff C. West, sales expert, long history on the front line in sales. You know, we do that at the Buyer's Mind from time to time. We want to make sure that we're talking to people who have a real strong sense, not just as a theorist, but as a practitioner. And Jeff led a huge sales team of sales professionals at Aflac for a couple of decades. You can insert your own duck joke here. And now he works with companies and individuals on improving their sales prowess. He is the author of The Unexpected Tour Guide, a delightful business fable about what really matters. Please welcome Jeff West. Jeff, how you doing, sir?
I am doing great, Jeff. Great to be on here with you today.
And you're calling in from where? Houston, Texas, is that right?
Actually, I drove into Houston. I live on a ranch we bought that's about halfway between Houston and Austin. It's literally out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Well, I have to fix that. You have to go out in the middle of nowhere and then go about 20 minutes further to get to our ranch. But I drove into Houston today to make sure we could get a good quality internet connection.
Oh, there you go. All right. But otherwise, go to the middle of nowhere, turn right, drive for 20 minutes, and you hit your... But the good news is you're in just sort of the uninhabited Texas, which means you can drive about 120 miles an hour if you want to.
You really can. And you know what? They almost encourage it.
Yeah, I was just on one of the roads, and I was just on one of the toll roads. I think I was driving from Austin to San Antonio, and the speed limit sign was 80, and I was getting passed up right and left. So Texas is it's like its own country out there. Let's always, I like to ask people when they join the show just to get a real sense of what it is they do. When you're at a cocktail party and somebody says, "What do you do for a living?" Not so much your job title, but how do you spend your days? How do you answer that question, Jeff?
You know, I say I help people make it in sales by creating an amazing amount of fusion between their prospects, their customers, their own career, and I give them the tools to make them stick, basically.
When you go to jeffcwest.com, you talk a lot about this, the idea of fusion points. Tell us about Fusion Point, the origin of the term, why this is impactful for you.
Well, you know, Jeff, as you know this, there's been a question that has puzzled sales managers for years. And that was, how could you take two individuals that have a relatively equal skill set, their resumes look similar, on paper, they both look like they should be very successful. Mm-hmm. And yet when you put them out in the field, it seems like one of them becomes very successful and the other one just doesn't really make it. And that question has just puzzled me for years. And when I decided to start speaking and writing as a full-time career, one of the things I did was put some research into that. And what grew out of that is what I brand now as Fusion Points: Engage the Science of Persistence. And basically the research involved just tells us that in every single decision that we make, there's an actual neurological process that occurs behind the scenes in the brain. And when we can apply that in our sales model, we actually are able to influence how those decisions are made. We can influence how a prospect even decides to listen to what we have to offer in the first place. We can influence the decision of how a potential buyer decides to become a customer, or how a customer decides to become a walking ambassador. But the most important thing, if you're in a sales leadership position, or even for a salesperson as an individual, we can actually influence how we make the decision to persist and be tenacious in our career.
Give us an example when you talk about this idea of there's a neurological signal that's taking place when that decision gets made. Give us an example of what that might look like.
Well, Dr. Antonio Damasio is the primary person that I consider the expert in this field. He's an expert in the neuroscience and the decision-making process. Mm-hmm. And basically what happens is when you make a decision, it's a combination of logic and emotion, and those are controlled in two separate areas of the brain. And I won't take you through all of his science, but basically what it amounts to is every single decision that we make is made from a combination where those two parts of the brain talk. And the result of our decision is always going to be a result of that balance. That's what's going to gear that decision. And inside that balance, we've also got the fact that our positive and our negative emotions actually affect the decision-making process in polar opposite ways. You know, you and I have a mutual friend, Bob Bird, mm-hmm. and I really love an analogy he gives about how our emotions get involved in our decision-making process. He says, you know, it's okay to have your emotions in the car with you, but you really don't want to let them drive. Mm-hmm. You want the logic to make the decision. But when we're having a decision that we're making, what really happens is our logic is in the driver's seat for most of us making the decision, but over in the passenger seat, our emotions are like someone over there messing with the steering wheel a lot. And if our negative emotions are the ones that are in control, well, then it's tugging that steering wheel over into the right to the slow lane where the traffic jam-ups are and where the struggles are. If our positive emotions are in control, well, then it's like it's nudging you to the left into the fast lanes where you can pick up some momentum. And that's a process that we go through ourselves. That's a process that our prospects and our customers go through, even in deciding to give us that initial appointment time. And so once you kind of learn those things, then you can apply that in a sales model. You can apply it in a customer service model. You can apply it in a sales management model. And what will happen is you will have more people making the decision to move further in the process.
So one of the things that drives me a little nuts when I'm watching a salesperson is how often they want to go to the logical side of the brain with facts and features, and here's my product does, and I learned this in a training class. I'm now going to share it to you now, whether you want to or not. And we end up just so dominating on the logical side of the brain that it's almost as if we squelch that emotional side of the brain, and yet that emotional side of the brain has to be at work in order to inspire us to want to do anything.
You're absolutely right. You've nailed it. And what happens in a customer's mind when a salesperson comes in and immediately wants to go to that logical side of what they have to offer and talk about their company and how great their product is, the customer actually, because they haven't even had the slightest bond mentally with that salesperson, they immediately start to push back. And what I coach salespeople to remember is, I use the term value proposition, but I have to explain it because I think most companies and most salespeople tend to not really understand what a value proposition is. It's really not even our value proposition. The value proposition truly is their value from our proposition. And if we focus there on when we get into the sales model and we're asking questions so that they have an opportunity to communicate with us what their needs are, and we can then focus on their value from our proposition, it makes a connection. And I even teach in the prospecting process. You can prime the pump in the prospecting process by providing value even prior to asking for that appointment in such a way that when you finally call them or when you finally walk in that door, they're actually looking forward to you showing up. Mm-hmm. It's that good.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that idea, the idea of their value from your proposition. But when you look at that in its actual application and the way that salespeople are regularly interacting with their customers, it's one thing to say, we want to make sure we're giving the customer permission to engage that emotional side. And one of the ways that you can make sure that that's not happening is if you don't want them to engage the emotion, then make sure all you've got is facts and figures and logic. But on the other hand, if a salesperson might agree with us and say, great, now how do I do that? Right. So if they're selling insurance, for example, how do they go about making sure that the customer is not only on the logical? Let's face it, insurance can be seen as something that's kind of dry and calculated, and I got this actuarial table over here. It can be seen as a fairly boring, non-emotional product. So how does a salesperson take their product and engage the customer's emotion?
Well, basically, it's all in how you frame it. For example, in the sales model that we had when I was with Aflac, we had basically a preliminary decision maker, which was the employer. And that employer had to make the decision on whether or not to make the Aflac programs available to the employees. Then we had the final decision makers, which would be the employees that would voluntarily sign up for an Aflac program and then bring it, they would have it through payroll deduction. When we were visiting with the owner of the company or a preliminary decision maker, you had to really understand what some of their needs were even before you walked in the door, so you could have an idea of how to ask the right questions to get them to openly discuss things that they were going to be dealing with. But from an owner's perspective, it just took a little bit of time to start thinking about, well, how does that business owner benefit from a relationship with Aflac? And in our model, it was not about what the policies do. The policies, quite frankly, are great at what they did, but to the business owner, they were almost irrelevant, not completely, because a business owner did care about the employees. But what meant something to the business owner was what having the programs in place for their employees actually did, because when we would approach them, and what I teach even in a modified version now, when I'm teaching in other companies, not just in the insurance industry. In this particular case, I would focus on, we wanted to spend a little time to take a preliminary look to see if the business would qualify for a program that we had that would actually take money that they're currently spending in the employee arena and redirect that money to the bottom line profit and help make them more profitable without them having to spend any money to do it. So even in how I would set the frame of the question, I would get them thinking about that. And then I would ask them, when we did visit together, I would ask them about the different issues they were dealing with in employee arena. So I would focus in that genre and bring it to their attention through asking them questions about how the healthcare was affecting their business and other things of that nature. However, when I would actually visit with the employees, their needs were completely different. They weren't worried about bottom line profit of the company. They were more worried about bottom line profit in their family budget. So you would ask questions to direct them to thinking about, okay, what would be the scenario if you were to miss work for a month or 2 months because you were seriously ill or hurt, or maybe you were having to miss work to care for a seriously ill spouse or child. And so we'd ask questions to get them to open up in that direction. But how we really made that emotional connection as we went along is we told stories. Stories are the most valuable tool in getting the emotional connection, I think, to happen between a potential buyer and a product or service that you have, because it's the story that will cross over and touch that emotional part of their brain. And then they really truly buy when that emotion touches the story touches the emotion, and then they keep the program based on logic. So they have to have both. If you don't give them both the logic and the emotion, they'll buy, but then later they'll have buyer's remorse. But if you've got the emotional connection, they'll buy. Then if you've got the logical component as well, then they'll retain. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking to create mutually beneficial situations.
How much do the stories rely or originate with previous customers? How much of the stories are to look at it and say, let me give you an example of someone who was in your shoes? You know what I'm saying?
Right. And when someone is getting started and they don't have a lot of their own stories, they still need to tell stories, but they may be telling stories of mentors of theirs who've been in the same industry. But as soon as those stories can be from your actual customer experiences, then you're adding a level of social proof in the scenario as well. And it's so important. I remember the very first enrollment I had in the insurance industry, where I had a group of employees that the owner had said we could meet with employees and do the enrollment. And I did not actually take anyone with me. My sales manager couldn't go. And he said, why don't you take one of our veteran associates with you? It was first enrollment. That way you could do it. Now, I made one of the biggest rookie mistakes on that first enrollment you could possibly make. I didn't take a veteran with me who knew what they were doing. Mm-hmm. And the reason I didn't is I was just getting started, and I knew that would involve commission splits. And I made a bonehead decision and didn't do it. Well, when I got there the next day and I did the enrollment, I met with 8 employees, and I did exactly what you were talking about earlier. I gave them products. I gave them prices. I gave them features. I talked about how great the company was. And when that day was over, not one single employee had signed up or bought any insurance policy. So I made $0. And so I called my sales manager up and I said, hey, David, this is Jeff. And I said, I didn't do this right. And he said, well, how many people did you see? I said, 8. He said, how many did you write? I said, none. He said, hey, Jeff, you didn't do this right. And I said, no kidding.
Yeah.
I said, no, I didn't do it right. He said, well, come watch me tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So the next day, he had a car dealership in Dallas, Texas he was working with. And I drove to Dallas. It was about a 45-minute drive. And I sat there and kept my mouth shut, and I took notes all day. And David met with 14 employees, and every single one of them got some sort of a product, either a disability plan or an accident plan or a cancer plan, something of that nature. And when he got through, I said, I think I know what I did wrong. I said, what? And I said, I didn't tell any stories. He said, you have to paint word pictures. You have to tell great stories so people can mentally put themselves in the shoes. Okay, if I'm in that situation, what would I do? And it gives them the comfort to realize, hey, this is probably for them.
You went out on your own several years ago after being with Aflac for decades. And then you said, we're going to write a book, and you came up with The Unexpected Tour Guide, this business fable about a salesperson who is just really, really struggling and finds an unexpected mentor along the way. Tell us just a little bit about the journey of writing the book and how that went for you and what that's gotten for you.
I tell you, Jeff, that has been one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever had in a business context, for sure. Mm-hmm. I had long been a writer for the people inside my organization. I would send out coaching emails, and every time I wanted to make a sales lesson, I would always put it in some form of a story format. And I think it's because that I've always liked books like Og Mandino books, and I love Bob Burg and John David Mann books. And so it was really kind of that was the genre that I preferred to write, even a short coaching email in. And so as I began to realize that it was about time for me to go ahead and branch off on my own, I started the book. And it's kind of funny. I wrote it, and it took several months to really get it like I wanted it. And I decided that I wanted to center it around homeless people. And the reason for that is it always touches my heart. And I'm one of those people that I think, yes, I realize not everybody makes great choices, but some situations are just, they really pull at my heartstrings. Mm-hmm. And my office in Houston was very close to an area where a lot of homeless people were always at the underpass. And there was one particular gentleman who used to always catch my attention, and I always tried to take good care of him. And there was just something about him that was different. And so as I started to write, I decided I wanted to write a book to teach some really good, solid sales lessons. I began to think of that gentleman. And so I wanted to create a scenario where the story would be good. So I actually used some real life characters in the mix. For example, the sales manager character in the Unexpected Tour Guide is a gentleman named Jack Amberson. Mm-hmm. Jack is actually the very first sales manager I ever had right out of college. He gave me my first sales book, and the character that I wrote and the things about him was so much like him. As a matter of fact, I even called him first and said, look, here's what I'm going to do, and I wanted your permission. I want to use your real name. And he was very flattered, and he's just such a super great guy. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I used him because there were so many things that he did that was so great. And I decided to use the homeless gentleman as my main characters, so to speak. But I just wrote, I wanted to write a story that people, even if they weren't in sales, would want to read, mm-hmm. and then teach some great sales lessons. Long story short, as I began to go out and speak, first I sought some mentoring from Bob Burg, who, as you know, is a friend of yours and a friend of mine. Mm-hmm. And then also, I said, look, I'd like to send this to you. I know you don't always have time for everything, but I'd like to send it to you. He said, mail it to me. Let me have that. And so I did. And I guess he'd had it a week or so. He emailed me back, one of the most positively affirming emails I've ever had in my life. And he was just so encouraging. He loved it. And so I at that point, I felt very comfortable with what was going on.
Right. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, it's a fun read. It's great. It doesn't take very long, and you really get you get to love Ray after a while. And I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but you get to love Ray after a while. We're just about out of time. I'm going to put you on the hot seat. Rapid fire questions, rapid fire answers. You ready?
I am ready.
All right. The very first job you ever had?
Very first job I ever had was working for a recreation department. I was 14 years old, and it was in Dalton, Georgia, and I actually coached kickball.
That's great. Awesome. When you were 10, you thought you were going to be what?
When I was 10, I thought I was going to be a truck driver because my stepfather, coincidentally named Jim Parrish, was a truck driver.
Well, there you go. The most beautiful place you've ever stood?
Oh, most beautiful place I ever stood was walking my daughters down the aisle for their weddings. And I have to say they're two equal positions and handing them up to their future husbands.
I love it. A book that you read early on in your life that made a profound impact?
How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling by Frank Betcher.
Mm-hmm. A movie you've seen several times, but you'd gladly see again?
Silverado. It used to be a new Western, but now it's kind of an old Western.
It's a classic. What a great cast of that movie. And then finally, your first celebrity crush.
Barbara Eden, and I still have it to this day.
I go off and on. Sometimes I say Barbara Eden, sometimes I say Elizabeth Montgomery, right in that same genre. But there was something going on there. So, all right, you're off the hot seat. So there you go. Jeff West, you can follow Jeff on jeffcwest.com. There you can learn more about him. You can follow him. You can read his blog and check out the Unexpected Tour Guide as well. And Jeff, that's available in the print version, which I have a copy of. There's an ebook as well. Is that correct?
That's correct, Jeff. For your listeners, what I thought I would do is that I would actually send them an ebook copy for free. There's two ways they can get it. Number one would be they would just get their cell phones out and text the word Fusion, FUSION, to 66866. And it'll send them a text back when they put in their email, and then it emails them the book. I'm also going to give them a little PDF that's a 6-step guide to creating Fusion with their customers, their prospects, and themselves. And the other way they can get it is they can go to www.jeffcwest.com/Jeff Shore, because I'm going to set up something special just for your followers.
That's outstanding. Great. Well, there you go. A little added bonus. Jeff West, thanks for being on The Buyer's Mind.
My pleasure, Jeff.
All right, so there you go. And Murph, we always like it when our guests come through and maybe offer a little added bonus for our listeners.
Nice, right? Freebies. Yeah. How can you go wrong? That's way to go.
Very nice. I love the idea that he loves to talk about the science of persistence. I'm in the first stages now of writing a book on follow up and how we follow up after the sale. But you sort of get the sense that if you're in sales, that trait called persistence, maybe it's a lost art a little bit. We're so worried about bugging people that maybe we just pull up far short of what we ought to do in order to serve their needs.
Well, and then we've talked about the idea of when you're reaching out to your customers, it's really about meeting their needs. Mm-hmm. If it's about you pushing your product, that's when it gets to be annoying. But if it's about meeting their needs, then how can you go wrong by following up and asking them those questions?
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. I loved the quote that he brought in from our friend Bob Berg here. It's okay to have your emotions in the car with you, but you really don't want to let them drive. That's great. I'll have to hit Bob up on that the next time I see him.
The relationship that you and he have with Bob Berg is fantastic, and we've had Bob Berg on the program before, and if our listeners haven't gotten over to read any of Bob's books, I would highly recommend that.
And the other thing that I really love that Jeff said, he mentioned value proposition, and I have to confess that I have a cynical streak, Murph, as you know, and my first thought was, okay, somebody say we're going to hear about value propositions again, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's like the term has been overused. But when he's put that spin on it to say their value from your proposition, I love that. I absolutely love that. And I want to just suggest to our listeners out here that that value is a buyer word, not a seller word, right? Value is a buyer word, not a seller word. Or to put it another way, value is only value if the buyer believes it to be value. So you have to ask yourself the question, the proposition that you're going to try and share now, who benefits more from that? The company or the customer, right? Because we tend to look at it and we say, let me tell you all about my product, how great it is, and here's a whole list of things that you're going to get with it. But if your customer does not find that to be valuable, if your customer does not find that that solves a significant problem in their life, then there's no value there. Value is a buyer word, not a seller word. And I just would challenge you to go back and think about all the things that you are regularly talking about and spending a lot of time talking about, and put it through that filter and ask yourself the question, is this something that I think is valuable, that my company thinks is valuable, or is it something that my customer thinks is valuable? Because if the customer doesn't think it's valuable, it's not valuable. Well, there you have another episode of The Buyer is Mine. Thanks, as always, for listening. On behalf of Paul Murphy, our show producer, and all of us at Shore Consulting, thanks for being a part of the Buyer is Mine family. Now go out there and change someone's world.